It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello friends, I am Rob here in the Lair of Omnicide. Today we are doing a State of the Dungeon address for the game that took place on April 15th, 2021. The game Dungeons & Dragons, still in Basic Edition. And the game is an adventure in Castle Caldwell and Beyond, which is kind of technically the second dungeons, the Dungeons of Terror, which is the basement of Castle Caldwell. And it is significant as this particular module contains several dungeons, again to give my players a sense of the dangers in dungeon crawling and an appreciation for the kind of skills that you want to have to keep you alive in those kind of games. Things like look up, don't make too much noise, don't waste a lot of time. You don't have a lot of luxury in waiting an hour and all of a sudden you get most of your resources back. You don't have that. So you have to make strategic, tactical delves into the dungeon, and when your resources are too low, you got to pull back and take another shot in all but the most desperate of circumstances. The dungeons themselves are pretty thin, bare bones stuff. I'm not going to give them a really great grade in a review on them, but really this is the kind of thing that a lot of us cut our teeth on back in the day. When I was starting in my role-playing game career, I, of course, was not a player. I was running games, but mostly what I did was I created dungeons, and most of them were about as thinly put together as this was. Because, after all, what did I really have for a resource except the basic red box Dungeons & Dragons set, which tells you how to make a character and how to set up and run a dungeon, and that's what this does. Later on, when you get the expert set, it talks about overland adventuring and things like that. But one of the key things about role-playing that I've grown to enjoy is the role-playing interaction and having your characters make significant choices and challenges that are outside of dungeons. And Dungeons & Dragons in the earliest days really focused on that. Now, of course, if you look at modern 5th edition, you'll notice that a lot of the sentiment goes into role play and making significant concrete decisions in your world. Even if the stories may seem somewhat linear, there's a lot of emphasis on your characters' backgrounds and personalities being important. So that wasn't so much the case in this one. It was very simple premise to get you in the dungeon and a dungeon to go in and conquer. And really that was all we needed back in the day. So it works. And that's, I'm sure, exactly what Mr. Harry Knuckles, thought. It's like, yeah, this is a functioning set of dungeons. And so, we are in the second level, effectively. It's treated as a separate dungeon, but it's really just the second level of Castle Caldwell. And the party has already had an encounter. They met up with the denizen of the first room, who goes by the name Tom. And he basically convinced them that he was harmless, and they let him up into the castle and locked him out because he was trapped in the dungeon. So that was taken care of the session prior. So we started out, the group was all back together again, all members were in attendance this time, which is good. And the group was getting ready to move forward. Now they're presented with a hallway with some doors, and the hallway wrapped around. They hadn't explored it yet. So when the whole group got together, they were in the starting room. Following the hallway, they found a door. And as they looked around the hallway, across from that door, as the corridor bent, they saw that there was a set of double doors further down that bend in the hall, and that the hallway once again bent at the very limit of their lantern's light. So the group had to, consider their options, and they thought the best one was to go and investigate the door rather than passing a door and leaving it behind them. So they checked the door for traps. Brilliantly, there were no traps. They listened at the door and they heard somebody on the other side muttering to themselves. They heard sounds of snatches of conversation. And the group's like, okay, we were warned. They actually had talked to Tom, and Tom said there were crazy people in this dungeon. So that they attacked him without provocation. So they were ready. They opened up the door poorly. It was loud. And alerted the two men inside, who were men standing around what looked like a magic user or alchemist's laboratory equipment. Pretty crude, but existent. They were wearing robes. And as the group came in, they were very much, oh, guests, we didn't know we were expecting guests, or we would have tried to clean the place up a little bit. Welcome, welcome. The group wasn't completely off their guard, and when they approached, drew daggers, and started trying to sink them into them, the group was ready. They downed one of these magic users without so much as a thought, and he went down very quickly. The other one did manage, after a failed attack, to get off his spell, because as it was scripted out in the adventure, they would try to stab first, and then they would try to cast a spell, because they're insane. Well, his spell was sleep. We all are familiar with how sleep works, right? 2 8-sided dice of hit dice. Go to sleep for 4 4-sided dice times 10 minutes. So, I rolled the amount of hit dice, and it was, I believe, 10 hit dice. Well, considering the 2 magic users are first level, and each member of the party is still first level, everybody went to sleep. Rolling for time, it was 70 minutes. They were asleep. And then the spell ended and they all woke up, and the magic user now didn't have his spell, but he was determined to keep stabbing people, and the party just finished him off. He's an unarmored magic user without a spell. There wasn't much he could do. But because he was insane, he insisted to fight to the death, and they ended up killing him. So they looted the room because the stuff they had some gear of some use to a magic user, and they had a couple of gems that the party found. The party has successfully stripped everything of value out of this level that they've come across so far, so that's been pretty good. Their looting skills are getting better, that's for sure. They also saw that the room was actually larger. It was actually conjoined with another room, basically, that was unfinished, that would have wrapped around the hallway and another room. But so they poked their heads down, and half the group went down to explore that new area, while Rune, the magic user, was kind of bundling up the alchemist gear, and the others were kind of searching around. This was unfortunate because when the 4 robber flies that were nesting in the wall came pouncing at them, the group was relatively undefended. However, they did have enough people. First of all, remembering they have 2 hirelings. They have Bimley the dwarf, and they have Shadowspawn the thief. They also, again as a reminder for the full group, they have Bella the halfling, who is their tank at the moment. They have Asfrid the cleric, who is trucking along the 2nd level, healing spells, yay! They have Chokesaw the thief, and Gorath the elf, and Marvin the Magnificent, the magic user, and Rune the magic user. That's the whole party. So going down that hallway was Asfrid and Shadowspawn and I believe Chokesaw. They went down to examine it because they saw that there were coins sprinkled on the ground. The flies that attacked them were robber flies, which do collect shiny things and eat people. So when these beagle-sized flies came flying out to attack them, they fought them off as best they could. Fortunately, Bella is pretty well defended in her plate armor. The group is relatively well equipped for first-level characters, so the flies didn't find much purchase. But they do have a bite that could spell death to anybody if I roll maximum damage, and a couple of the weaker ones could really be discomfited by a good chomp from these things. So the group worked together to fight them off. Bimley earned his pay here, getting a critical that splattered one of them all over. But they were tough. They took an arrow, they took an odd thrown dagger, It took a concerted effort to put each one of them down. They finished off 3 and the last one broke morale and fled. The fight really went quite well for the heroes. They took very little damage. Astrid got nommed a little bit, and I believe Chokesaw got bitten. They both used healing potions immediately to get back up to full power, because they bought a surplus of healing potions. It's only gold, it's worthless if you die, so they spent it to heal themselves, which worked. They collected all the coins that were on the ground. They examined the unfinished wall that the robber flies had been nesting in, but that fly had taken off, and there weren't any others in there, so they solved that. They did feel that there was fresh air coming in through some of the cracks in the wall, but none of them were big enough that a character could crawl through. So that's something that, well, that's really going to be Caldwell's problem now, not theirs. So the group went out through the double doors, which I threw a scare in, having Bella, who opened the door, rolling for poison. There wasn't any poison. They for a second lost discipline, said they were going back through the door that hadn't been checked. So they went around the hallway, and as they got to the far end, they found that the hallway curved back to the south and possessed several doors. So they went to the first door, went through all the appropriate, cautious steps that they needed to, determined that the door had no traps on it, determined there was nothing alive in the room, went in, and it was an empty room. Yeah, that's how these work sometimes. The floor was covered in dust, clear that nothing was in there. They poked around in the dust a little bit. There was a lot of dust in there, but they poked around, determined that there really wasn't any value in spending more time in there, which is true. But it's a big room. These big 30 by 40 rooms are, substantial. And, for as much as this is a small castle, this guy's getting quite a bit of storage. He probably will want to have a better access, though, than just a trapdoor leading down into this place, if he wants to use it, which he should. It's pretty cool. They went a little bit further, and they found a really nice door. This really nice door had a really nice lock, which both of the thieves looked at and go, this is way too good. We can't get through this. And they, I believe, determined... No, they didn't. They just, this lock is too good, and that door is really solid. And is untouched by the passage of time, which usually means there's something special about this door. And they smartly decided, we need to find the key to this keyhole to get in here, rather than spending lots and lots of time trying. So they moved on to the final door, determining that the corridor continued on for another 60 feet, but ended in a dead end, which they never did check. Yeah. Checking into that door, they found out that, again, they did appropriately search the door for traps. They did everything that they're supposed to. And they found that this was another 30 by 40 room. This place had a budget on 30 by 40 rooms, quite honestly. And this was what looked like a kind of a funerary, maybe a visitation room of some sort. They had pieces of religious paper and litter all over the floor. But it was a sizable room, and there was a door in the far wall. They basically looked around the place, but there wasn't anything of any great value in there. Again, these things were notorious for sometimes just having nothing at all in a room, and no real reason why some creatures are going to be in various rooms, how they get there, how they survived, whatever. It's almost like they were designed by rolling dice, letting randomness take over. So that will be a knock against them in the review, but they do pose, again, a static challenge for the heroes. Going through the next door found a hall with 3 doors, 2 to the north and 1 to the south, that was lit by purple ever-burning candles. Magical. Nice little bonus for them. They scooped up one of the candles. It doesn't get quenched. It's an illusory light. And they're nice 2-foot-long, wax candles. So they took them with them. Took one with them. The others are still in there. But there's a bundle of a total of 4 in that hallway. They examined the first door to the north and found a gelatinous cube. The gelatinous cube did manage to hit Bimley. It could not hit Bella. I tried, but whether she's too small or Well, she has good armor class. It didn't hit. But it did score Bimley pretty good and paralyzed him. So the group did have a bit of a shock when the tough dwarf dropped to the ground. But they finished it off with a flurry of attacks, forcing their way in and basically bottling it at the door. And it dropped. In the body of it, they found a nice looking dagger on top of all the other daggers that had been thrown inside of it, because the party was getting really good at throwing daggers. Marvin was particularly on point with throwing them, but Rune could hurl a pretty good dagger too, and that is also what Asfred had Shadow Spawn doing. Remember, Asfred hired Shadow Spawn, and Marvin had hired and bribed hideously Bimley. So they defeated the gelatinous cube. They gave a healing potion to Bimley, and Bimley's morale just keeps going up. They got him plate, they got him healing. He wasn't fully healed because he took a sizable burn from that gelatinous cube, but he's back on his feet, willing to continue earning his pay. And the group then checked the door to the south. And that led to a huge room with unfinished walls that they looked at and go, nope. Looking at their map, the benefits of mapping, they determined that that last door to the north from that hallway was going to be a small 20 by 30 room. They were correct. Mapping. They has it. And it was an empty room, so didn't really do much to them. So they went back into the larger room, which had several kind of chambers that were dug out, almost in natural cave-like formations, rather than having appropriate walls and doors assembly. And one of them had light coming out of them. Well, they determined this was kind of a dangerous position to be in, so they were kind of striding around and trying to get a good vantage on what might be down that tunnel, when one of the people came out who were in that tunnel. He was a berserker. He had brands dedicating himself to chaos on his body. And really what drew him out of his cave was that he was there to answer the call of nature. So he, without noticing the party, just dropped trow and began doing what he was going to do until he saw the group, who was holding lights. They're not hiding very well. And he, being a berserker, saw an enemy and immediately pulled out his short sword and roar! Unfortunately, his pants were still down around his knees, so he wasn't able to charge very fast. But the others who were in the cave all heard the commotion and came out charging. Now, the total were 4 berserkers. 3 of them were standard berserkers, which are kind of nasty fighters, but not terribly tough. Their boss, however, had a really nice sword, and he looked like he knew how to fight. So the group decided they were going to back up, go back and use the door from the hall as a choke point to fight with. This wasn't a bad tactical decision. There were 4 opponents versus the 8 people in the group, but they were cautious because they're first level characters. This is actually showing that they have learned quite a bit about surviving as adventurers, and I was very much impressed with them working together in such a way. So while Bella stood in the doorway trying to stop them and the rest of them scurried in from behind, they had some tactical advantages. Unfortunately, though, it meant that their larger group was crammed into this hallway, and the berserkers had, relatively little problems in their end. So, also the thing is, they're berserk. They're not really capable of thought. They just want to get into the fight as best as they can. So after the one moves up and attacks Bella with his short sword, the others try to bull rush through, and Bella does not hold the point. She's just a little halfling. So one gets past her and into the hallway. The other one basically has Bella surrounded on the outside. So there's one inside, one outside, and the other 2 are just foaming and getting ready to come in as soon as they can. Marvin starts saying we should close that door and cut off this nonsense, but there's an active combatant on their side, and that wasn't so easy. until the group just unloaded on him. He, I believe, managed to stick someone. I can't remember who. But he got turned into fertilizer in a round, just mulched. I believe it was Bimley who delivered the final blow. He's pretty strong, and that axe of his works quite well. But all the same, he went down in a heap. And when they tried forcing their way through in kind of a scrum, the Berserkers got through Bella again. But Bimley rolled amazingly and held the point. He's a dwarf, and a tough one at that. So they didn't break in. As a matter of fact, the one who was fighting Bella fumbled, and he got basically picked up, killed with a critical. I believe it was Marvin. Caught him with a critical. And he got cast back into his friends, and they shut the door. So the group kind of took stock as these two buffoons battered at the door trying to get in and continue the fight. They just kind of realized that there's two of them. They haven't proven to be exceptionally tough, and if everybody takes a shot, they kind of eliminate them before they even take any damage in return. So they get everybody in sync, get ready to go, and open the door to find out that the Berserkers had backed off, and the leader had grabbed the other one, picked him up, put his horned helm on the head of his Berserker comrade, and was going to use his head as a battering ram and try to break the door down. Because of course they would. They're drunken barbarians. So they opened the door, and that caught the bad guys completely by surprise. Because none of the heroes are using two-handed weapons, the combat went pretty smoothly. Their initial round did kill the leader, but only dropped the one who was being carried to the ground. And he had the helmet on, and he picked up his chieftain's sword and moved forward and tried to attack with it. He got in a shot, and it did not hit. Armor class 2 is tough to hit when you're using level 1 monsters, so Bella's pretty well protected. Although, or no, he attacked Bimley. Bimley reported that armor that he was wearing got cut into by that sword. It's magical and pretty good, too. So then they turned around and dropped the... It wasn't even close. They just turned around and just nuked him. Daggers were thrown, axe was swung, a mace was swung, short sword was stabbed, and they just... Again, remember, we're not using battle mats and layouts here. We're using theater of the mind, so everybody wants to attack him. They can force the situation, since there's only one foe, and move him around so that, yeah, everybody can take shots. So the Berserker went down. The group were saddened to find out that all they had were their crummy short swords that looked like they'd been chewing on them. But the sword was really cool. It's a long sword, and after examining it, Asfrid rolled really well and determined that this was a magical relic, a purifier blade that was created by servants of the light to fight against evil, especially the undead, which they had been made in a time when the fate of the world was at stake by powerful necromancers that had summoned and raised a huge army of undeath. And the Clerics of the Light were a bastion that protected the people, and these blades were created by a coalition of magic users working along with the clerics to make these blades that work especially well against the undead. So, that's what they've got. When they talked it over, they quickly found out a couple of interesting things. Number one, Gorath never put on his plate mail armor that he bought. Because they missed the session prior, they bought all their stuff right away at the beginning of the session, so he never figured out that his armor class was actually quite a bit better if he just put that armor on, which he did. Armor class 2, baby. Yeah. So since he's just as well equipped, and he had more hit points than Bimley, who hadn't completely recovered from that gelatinous cube nomming, they're like, here, have a magical sword and you can take point. Now, remember, Gorath had a cursed blade already, and he was a little leery of the magic. But a cool, glowing longsword, yeah, it grew on him pretty quickly. Although his luck didn't necessarily, but that's foreshadowing. They examined the berserkers' room and found out that these berserkers were sitting on a pile of 7,000 copper pieces. It's like finding a group of whacked out, drugged up bodybuilders were guarding 7,000 pennies. It's just kind of ludicrous, but again, randomly rolled dungeon. That's what you get. And it really is feeling like a randomly rolled dungeon. But, yep, so be it. We're gonna get through this. So then they went through another one of the southern tunnels that led to another chamber. And in that chamber, they found a chest. Oh yes, there's a chest. And immediately Chokesaw goes, nope, not going to go by it, not going to do anything with it. He's scared. And they're like, Shadow Spawn, you want to go check it out? He walked over, he's like, I don't see any traps. I'm not going to open it, but I don't see any traps. Eventually they got Chokesaw to find his spine, and he went up and examined it, and he didn't find any traps. So they have two expert opinions saying there's no traps, but nobody wanted to open it. They were all pretty leery after having seen Hacksaw get killed by that poison trap. But finally Rune says, remember, Rune is a magic user, he's like, I'm just going to open it. We could sit here and talk about it all day. I'm just going to open the thing. So he does. It was trapped. 3 steel darts sprang out from the trap inside. 2 of them hit him. Each one did a D4 damage. He's a magic user. I only rolled 3 points of damage and he lived. He was so close to being dead. If one of those had rolled a 4, he was done. Nope. Only rolled 3. Okay. So be it. You live. You've been ventilated. Healing potion. Glug, 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 glug. Stop the bleeding. They weren't poisoned. Lucky him. The chest was empty. Because of course it was. But they have another chest that has another trap if they want it. So they went and they brought it over and they threw that 7,000 copper in there. They also explored around the rest of that first big unfinished cave to find out there's really nothing there. Clearly they had intended this to be more, that they had planned on excavating and finishing, but this was going to be a huge room and they never got that far, which is fine. Caldwell may do something with it someday, or may just keep it as a cellar of some sort. So they got to this point and they're like, okay, well, there's one more tunnel going south that we saw, so we'll go through that. But they shifted the order around a little bit. So they go along and they find out that the tunnel is lit. Ah! Oh, one of the other things they also found out was in the barbarians, or the berserkers' room, they had a burning log. It was burning with real fire, so where they got it from, they don't know. How these guys survived in the dungeon with no food source, they don't know. That's how these dungeons work. So they went and down this tunnel, and there's a long tunnel that snaked around, and the place looked kind of deserted. So they went in, and all of a sudden 3 creatures jump out from alongside. They were ambushing. The group was not phased. They made a good roll, rolled a 6 to avoid surprise, and were not surprised. And won initiative. The creatures are Thools. Thools are a horrid combination of hobgoblin, so they've got cunning and tactics, trolls, so they got that vicious streak and some regenerative abilities, and ghouls, so they can paralyze with a touch, and they're not fussy about eating dead things. All told, they're nasty creatures. Fortunately, they're still low-level creatures. And if you kill them, you drop them to 0 hit points, the regeneration stops. So they don't have to worry about, burning the corpses like trolls or anything like that. So, the fight broke out. Again, some dice were rolled and didn't exactly show them to their best light. Gorath, for instance, was having a horrible time trying to hit, despite the fact that these things, because they have part ghoul, have an undead taint, and the sword was eager to cut into them. He was having all kinds of problems. But the group basically made it a bloody fight. And only Gorath got hit, really? And Gorath is an elf, and he's immune to ghoul paralysis, which also makes him immune to Thule paralysis. So he got nicked for 1 point of damage a couple of times. It was grazed. But still, first level elf, only like 6 or 7 hit points, so, you know, it's still not an inconsequential thing. So he was getting worried. The Thules hate elves because they know that they're resistant to their paralysis. And they're intelligent enough to use that as a tactic to their advantage. So they prioritized taking him down, but they just couldn't. So the Thules finally all died. The group looted, which they found the key to that one special room, as well as a number of gems, which is nice, and they also found a number of electrum pieces and some gems. So they have some cash. Not quite as much as the floor above, but have... Oh, and they also found out, too, without a shadow of a doubt, with a critical hit that Marvin got, that dagger that he found was a +1 magical dagger, too. So far they found 2 magical items, 2 magical weapons. That's pretty good for a starting dungeon. But they also found out that sword of his glows a little brighter when it's in the presence of the undead. And if they're powerful undead, it glows brighter. These Thules were enough to get it glowing dimly. It's still glowing, though, after the Thules are dead. So they think there's still undead in the area. There's nothing more to do, though. There's no other entrances, so they backtracked. And now they have a key. They could go to that door that had the specially warded lock. When they went there, the sword started glowing brighter. They're like, okay, where's the undead? They went around all the rooms, but couldn't find out why it was glowing. So they unlocked the door. Open it up. The room is empty. It's a 30 by 30 room, but in one corner of the room, there's a cabinet against the wall. It's in the corner, and it's open, and there's jewels and piles of coin just dripping out of the thing. It's completely stuffed with extremely valuable... Well, of course they're thinking trap. Who wouldn't? So they throw a dagger at it. Dagger just bounces off. They get a 10-foot 2-inch pole and they move up and they try poking at it. Rune does this because Rune has a death wish or something. He's not showing a great deal of restraint, but the rest of the party is scared and they're not really willing to take a lot of chances themselves. So as Rune moves up to poke it, poof, he vanishes with the pole. That's not supposed to happen. So they kind of quickly tried to figure out exactly what happened and whether or not he's still alive. They have no idea. Finally, Marvin says, you know what? He is Marvin's friend. Marvin will go and help his friend. And he went over to the cabinet and poof, vanished. Gimli's like, hey, my paycheck! And ran after him and poof, vanished. The rest of the group looks at themselves, looks at what's going on? Do we really want to do this? And then Choksaw goes over, poof, vanishes. And the other 3 are like, we really should go after them. I mean, they're probably not dead. We don't know if they are or not, but they're probably not dead. So they go over. So that ended the night. So this is the circumstance. The next time they'll start out, Rune will get to act. Then a few minutes later, Marvin will come in. And then the next round, Bimley will come in. And then a couple more rounds, Choksaw and the others. So, now the room that they came into, I did describe. It's a room that's in the center of that bend in the hallway. They knew there was something there. There's no reason that this big empty spot would exist, so they rationed that it was a room, but it didn't have any entrances. They even searched the walls around it to a certain extent, where they thought it was most likely that they would find it, and there's no secret door. But the teleporter brought them into it. So they're now standing, when they appear in the room, they are in a center of a very large room, 60 by 40. And surrounding the wall they're facing and the side walls are sarcophagi. 10 of them in this room. And anybody who knows anything about how these things go, there's probably a good reason why that sword was glowing. And it's often the nasty undead that are in sarcophagi. So, should be fun. I believe the group is at full power, even if they don't necessarily have all of their spells, so it should be interesting. But that's what happened in this game. Looking forward to the next session, which will be the last encounter on this swing through Dungeons & Dragons. It will be the very first part of the 4th session. So, yeah, pretty good. All things considered, it's been really good. They've learned a lot, and they've demonstrated they've learned a lot, too. I'm not just saying this. I think they did a really good job, and they've really covered their bases, and not saying they're out of the woods yet, but I think they've learned a lot, and I think they've done really well. So I'm going to be very happy to let them choose the next thing that we do, and I'm really excited to see what they choose. So, thank you very much for joining me. I am Rob. Until next time, roll some dice, play some games, have some fun, and stay safe, everyone. Thank you for joining me this time, and until the next, farewell.